This episode, we are connecting with Nikki Colmone, who is a certified shadow work practitioner specializing in womb shadow work. Thank you for being open to having a conversation with me today, Nikki. I am so excited to have you. And I like to open up these conversations by sharing a little bit about why I invited you to be on the podcast. So for me, I think that it is really, really important that leaders are people who are willing to go first, to do the thing that nobody else has done, to be a bit of a trailblazer. And in that trailblazing, they're doing things to help other people. They're helping pave the way so that they can go back, lend a hand, invite somebody forward, and maybe their way is a little bit easier because of the work that you've set forth and done yourself. And you definitely embody all of that. You just even specializing in womb shadow work is very unique and rare and very much, a pioneer type moment. Nikki is the owner and founder of the Dark Goddess Collective, which offers services and programs dedicated to help heal women through trauma in order to step into their soul's purpose, which we totally need more of that. Through her program, Womb Alchemy, which I think is enrolling right now. Is that right?
Yeah.
Nikki? All right. Right. Well, now, when we're recording this. So if you're listening to this, when it's launched, you're going to have to wait until the next round potentially. Nikki teaches women how to use their trauma as passion and purpose by discovering their confidence, creativity, and inner magic in order to align themselves to their unique purpose in this world. So, Nikki, for the people who don't know you, if you could share a little bit about your journey, because you weren't always Nikki, the womb shadow work practitioner.
No, I was definitely not. But it really kind of starts off with what you said is that trailblazing, because I feel like so much of my life has been about that. People would be like, oh, like you can't do that, or you should be doing this. And I'd be like, hell no. Like, I don't want to do that. That sounds stupid. And I would always just pave my own path. And even my family to this day is just kind of like, Nikki, you just always do your own thing, like that's just like how I've always been. And so I think, for a long time, I struggled really hard with trying to figure out what I was supposed to be doing. What was my purpose here? And, I had a lot of the world and society and family kind of try to plant ideas in my head, but none of it felt right. It just didn't, deep down, you just knew like that's not really actually it. You gave it a go, but you're like, no, that's not it. So I was kind of a jack of all trades. I did so many different things. And then, eventually I decided to go back to school and finish my degree. And I took a solo camping trip, and it really kind of changed my life. That was something that I would never ever do before that moment.
Where did you go camping?
So I was living in Wisconsin. That's where I'm from.
Okay.
And I went 3 hours up north just by myself. And people are like, you're going with a guy. And I'm like, no, I'm literally going by myself. People couldn't believe that I was doing this. And I had never camped like that before. I didn't even know how to start a fire. Nothing. I had no idea. So this is my
on a reality show called Survivor with more skills than you had. I'm glad you're still here and talking to us today.
This is my personality. It's just I get an idea and I'm like, yeah, let's just do that.
I'll fucking figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. I did figure it out. And it was the most mind-blowing, amazing weekend of my life, because it was the first time I really was by myself and had to depend on myself, because I was so afraid to be alone. And after that moment, I went back to school, and I went to kind of a very different college, and which is a whole separate story. But basically, we got to make our own curriculum. And so I was talking to my advisors, and I was like, I don't know what I want to do. And one of them was like, well, what did you do this summer? And so I told them about the camping trip, and they were like, oh my gosh, it sounds like you should be studying that. And I was like, camping? How do you study camping? And so then I looked into it, and I started researching wilderness therapy. I started, learning about neuroscience and the brain development, and especially how the brain ages after trauma, especially,
Mm.
and things just started to click, and I was like, holy shit, this is why I struggled so much as a young adult, and this is why that weekend was so life changing for me. And I actually, my thesis, I basically turned into a book, and that was my first book. It's called The Nature Mindfuck. It's on Amazon for anybody that's interested.
That sounds like a
Um,
fantastic read. I will be adding that to
yeah.
my list. We will
It's
drop the link in the show notes for all of you.
yeah, so it's a mix of memoir and like self-help, basically. Um And so that really kind of introduced me to quote unquote shadow work in a sense. And so I decided I wanted to start my own business and I wanted to help people with this, but I didn't really know how to go about it because I wasn't a licensed therapist. I wasn't anything like that. And I had a huge background in nutrition. And that was something I had been certified in. And so very I tried to pair that with nutrition. It didn't end up working out. But what it did do is it landed me in a spiritual business coaching group. And that's where I found Danielle Massey, who is my mentor, who you're going to have on the podcast, it sounds like,
Mhm.
soon. And she was talking to us about shadow work, and she was like telling us all about what it was. And I was like, holy shit, this is what I studied. This is everything I studied. This is it right here. So I immediately booked sessions with her. And my very first session with her, we ended up going into my womb space, and it was a cold stone church, and it was a miserable. And I just like I was blown away that my religious upbringing was like literally housed itself in my womb, and that's why I felt so disconnected and didn't know who I was or what I was supposed to be doing. And so I did, several different sessions with her, and over the course of that time, each time I was always going right back to the womb because that's what I needed. And I realized, like, this is the work I'm supposed to be doing. And she kind of helped, confirm that for me. And so I started doing that work. I did her certification for shadow work. And, because of my own journey and everything that I have gone through in my life, all of the religious trauma, sexual trauma, creative blocks, sensuality, like deprivation, like all of this stuff. Um, Womb shadow work kind of was just born throughout my own healing process. And I realized, like, I don't want to do just any kind of shadow work. I want to do that because there's so many other women out there that are so disempowered, and they think it's normal. They
Mhm.
think that living this way that's just how life is, because that's what I was told. But
Mhm.
for some reason, I had this sense to be like, fuck that. I don't think that that's real. I don't think that's true. And I'm just going to keep looking until I find it. And I eventually did. And so that's kind of why I'm so passionate about what I do and helping women find that for themselves. And I do that with womb shadow work. And that's kind of how that was all born. So,
Yeah, it's really interesting to me because when I work with people who are really, really living out their calling, right? And this is like you don't necessarily get to pick your calling. It is
yeah.
really something you are called to. And oftentimes it really does come through us alchemizing our own lived experience, our
Hmm.
own healing journey. And I think that that's because we really can't speak with clarity or passion about things that we have not experienced firsthand. You can offer people, information. You can offer people, how to's and things like that. But even, being a therapist, I know that, oftentimes like clients who would come in with addiction, right? They would be like, well, have you ever been addicted to anything? And I honestly, the truth for that for me is no, I haven't.
Right.
So yes, like I can talk to you as, you know, a therapist, but like I can't talk to you as somebody who truly understands that lived experience and what it is to go through that. And no, we can't ever understand a certain person's experience with something. But even I work with a lot of people who have gone through or who are currently dealing with chronic illness because that is a part of my lived experience. That's a part of my
Mhm.
story. So when they're like, man, like I really had a hard time getting through the day today and I just feel like, what's the point? I feel that. Like I get
Yeah,
that. And so it's
right.
a lot easier for them to talk and listen and relate because it's part of my experience and they know that. So I think that that's like a really powerful piece that, you know, for anyone listening to this who's like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with my life, like look at what you're experiencing,
Mhm.
look at what you're
Mhm.
going through, look at the things that maybe like you were told that aren't making sense to you, and think about where things are not aligning or things are not resonating, and maybe start to look in the in between spaces
Mhm.
there. The other thing that I think is really interesting about your journey is that sometimes we hear that people are like, oh, yeah, like, you know, Nikki, she's a natural born leader. It sounds like that is actually true for you, where you are a person who was always questioning things, who was always kind of like looking for the thing that maybe didn't add up or didn't make sense. You weren't just somebody that was quick to say yes or go along with whatever you were being told or the dominant narrative, even though it sounds like a lot of that was very present, right? It sounds
Mhm.
like there was a very clear dominant narrative given to you or prescribed to you in your earlier years. Can you share a little bit about what that was like for you to really start to question something that was basically like surrounding you for the majority of your life?
Yeah, so you say, I had that strength to, just say like this is not that I'm just going to do this thing. Well, that's true, but it's also not true.
Hmm.
I bought into it. I was the biggest Christian out there. I tried really really hard to fit in. I lied to myself for years and years and years. But I think the thing that always, came back was deep, deep down, there was like this little voice saying, that's not right, you know? And I think that that's that little voice sometimes no matter, no matter how squashed or small it is, you can still feel it there.
Hmm.
And that's kind of what it was for me. So even though, I was really big into Christianity and I tried really, really, really hard, on the outside, my family was like, oh, what a good Christian girl, blah, blah, blah. But in the inside, looking back, I can just be like, "Yeah, it never really was." Um, but I think in those moments, I definitely did buy into it. I suppressed everything about myself, my true self, to be something that I wasn't, and it fooled myself even.
Hmm.
Um I know that, we're going to kind of talk about this. You had mentioned you wanted to talk about autism because I found out I was autistic. That goes right in hand with that too. Is like I masked so well that I fooled myself for 30 plus years, So I think it's the same thing. So yeah, I mean, like, growing up, I think looking back, I can be like, "Oh, yeah, I never actually believed that. I had questions about that." But it's in those moments that it's so difficult, that's so hard. And I did struggle. I still sometimes struggle because, you have family members that, you know, push back a little bit and you kind of fall into those old beliefs like, "Oh, yeah, what if I am wrong? Oh," but it's easier to catch now, whereas
Hmm.
before when you're in it, it can be so I mean, that's your narrative and that's all you know. So I think that, for anybody listening that can identify with that, I think they can also probably identify with that small little voice, like something inside of them that's like, "Yeah, but," even though they don't know what's on the other side of that but, like, they know that there's a but. And I think that just following that it's going to lead you to somewhere. And I think that that's always what I had hope in. Something that I always told myself is what I'm doing isn't working. So I got to do something drastically different. I got to do something I haven't done before if I want anything to change. And I said that to myself so much. I said that to myself. I went from, kind of being atheist to jumping back into Christianity head first, and I said that to myself, but that still didn't really do it, jumping back into, well, I'm going to pretend to be a Christian, but I don't really know what I believe. It's just, so I think that you just have to get to that point where it's just like, well, what I'm doing isn't working and I'm just going to try something different. And I think what you said before is perfect is look at the journey that you have, that you're currently in, you know, everything that I do, I've gone through. And I mean, you're so right. I have a lot of clients that do mentorships with me after a while that they're like, now I want to start my own business and stuff. And it's like, well, what business do I want to start? It's like, well, what's your story? Because you are your first client, and that's essentially how all of these amazing coaches and stuff are born, because they're just helping like earlier versions of themselves,
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, and it's not easy to do. And I think this is why, for me, I really think that wanting to have a podcast where I'm like interviewing people who have gone through this is so important, because when you are looking to step into leadership, right? And I don't care if you're a coach or if you're a parent or you're just like looking to show up as a leader in your own life, meaning that you are making your own choices that are in alignment with your truth. It is really difficult to do because we're stepping out of usually what was prescribed or given to us. And that fear of rejection is a really, really deep fear. And we think about, back, not too long ago, for thinking about things in the grand scheme, we lived in community, right? So if you were rejected, what would happen? Like, you're probably not going to get shelter. You're probably not going to get enough food. You might not get protection. So being rejected by the whole, right, or your community, that probably meant that you weren't going to live all that much longer. Right.
right.
And so that fear of rejection, it feels very visceral to us. And it feels like, oh my gosh, like I'm going to die. Like, if these people don't accept me, like,
Yeah.
it's not going to be good for me. And so I need to fit in, because fitting in equals survival. So
Mm-hmm.
when we break out of that and we go against the grain, that is so important in terms of really recognizing that, again, doing shadow work around this. I can do this and still be safe. I can do this and still survive. I can do this and still be worthy and deserving of
Mm-hmm.
love.
Mm-hmm.
It's a hard first step to take, though, because again, our body is feeling like this is going to come down to whether we're going to survive or not. It's a
Mm-hmm.
very real and valid thing that's coming up. But is that actually real and true in terms of your particular life? No. But it
Mm-hmm.
takes awareness and our ability to have those conversations, which oftentimes are made easier in the context of shadow work, to be able to really unlock that and feel like, okay, yep, my body can feel like this, but I'm still going to go over here and make this other choice anyway, even though it feels
Mm-hmm.
hard and it feels like a
Mm-hmm.
life or death situation.
Yeah.
Um, and I think, just kind of going back and touching a little bit on the masking, I think is something that a lot of us do. You're like even more of an expert for reasons that I'll allow you to kind of get into. But again, especially as women, or, people who are raised female, we are taught to do whatever we need to do to make everybody else comfortable, to be polite, to fit in.
Yeah.
So that's oftentimes why it's more difficult for women and female identifying people to be able to step up and step into leadership, because oftentimes it means going through that rejection wound, and really being able to self regulate in that process. Can you share a little bit, kind of going back into the masking, like, since you were so good at it, how did you even come to realize that you were doing it?
Oh gosh, that's such a good question because sometimes I don't even know I'm doing it, like yeah, I don't know. I think I got to the point where I've done so much shadow work, like countless hours of shadow work, and there were still some very basic things that I struggled with that didn't make sense. Like the change of routine. Why did that lead to such an epic, like, meltdown, or like little things like that. And I would dive into my shadow and I would uncover things, but there were some things that just never truly changed. And not because they couldn't be healed or anything like that, but because I didn't realize that just my brain's a little bit different. I'm autistic and I'm also ADHD. Um, and so I think that once I realized those things, when I realized that, okay, for some reason, some of my shadow isn't around these issues, isn't totally like, I'm not seeing the results I normally see. That's when I started kind of researching a little bit more about it, and I was like, "Holy shit, I think that I am autistic, and I have been autistic my entire life." And sure enough, the more people that I looked at their stories, I looked at their symptoms, what they were dealing with, I was like, "Yeah, I definitely am." And that is when things started to shift and heal for me.
Mm.
Sometimes I think the realization of just, y- just sharing, like hearing people going through similar things and sharing those experiences, you could be like, holy fuck, that's me too. I had no idea that that's what that was, right? When we have some conscious awareness around some things, and for me, when I was conscious of the fact that I was autistic, that's when I was like, oh, okay. Then it was like all of the shadow work I had done previously on those things, it all started to fall into place. It all started to make sense. And it started to actually like integrate and work, because it was a big part of shadow work is action. If you don't know what to do to integrate and take those action steps, it's going to make healing that shadow a little bit harder. So for me, I could go back into my inner child and I could heal certain, memories of me stimming and being embarrassed by it, but without knowing the full context of why I was stimming or what I was doing and how that made me feel and all of that stuff, realizing that I was autistic and I was doing those things to self-regulate. Without that knowledge, it it didn't hit the same way. And so once I figured that out, then it's just kind of like it was like that missing puzzle piece, and it all kind of fell into place. And then I started taking different actions and started doing different things, creating more boundaries where there needed to be, um, you know, before just saying yes to things, just being like, okay, let me think about that for a second, you know. And that's when it really started to happen, I think, for me. It's so yeah, I think that it's really just a combination of knowing yourself, in the shadow, and then taking those action steps, in your waking life and figuring things out in your waking life as well.
Mhm. Yeah. And it's really what it comes down to is acceptance, right?
Yeah.
And unless we know ourselves, we can't fully accept ourselves. And
Mhm.
there's so much that can be done, in the subconscious realm, but there is still conscious work that we need to do as human beings
Yeah.
to learn about ourselves, to be able to do identity work. Like, who are you? Who do you want to be? Who is the highest version of yourself? What is your truth? Even things that maybe you didn't know about yourself that are going to impact how your brain is actually functioning. And if your brain is functioning in the way that we consider to be like neurotypical, and if it's not, what things do you need to be able to accept about yourself so that you can put yourself in a position to thrive?
Mhm.
Because I feel like so many people, whether you have a label or a diagnosis for it, it matters, but it doesn't matter. Yes, it's
Yeah.
helpful
Right.
because then we can be like, oh, I have, or I am, or I struggle with whatever your, preferred theme is for that. And this is why XYZ. But sometimes we might not get a label or a diagnosis, but that doesn't mean that we have to then continue to force ourselves to adhere to situations or to be able to relate to other people and environments in a way that doesn't feel good for us. Even if you never were able to uncover this about yourself, it still is okay, right, to have boundaries
Mhm.
around how much you take on emotionally or sensory wise, like what feels acceptable or comfortable for you. And I think that, that's a big message that I really try to impart to people, is that ultimately you don't need to have a reason for setting yourself up to thrive in this life. And I think also when, we're bringing it back to leadership, leaders are people who are willing to like stand up and be like, this is me. This is who I am.
Yeah.
This is how I need to like function and operate in the world. This is how I'm setting myself up for success. I take ownership of who I am, and I'm willing to put in the extra intention and effort to make sure that I am showing up as my best self so that I can then show up as my best self for others.
Mhm.
Um, so I am a little curious, now that you've been able to uncover and do the work around acceptance, what are some things that you have incorporated into your life, both personally and professionally, to help you really make sure that you're showing up as your best self?
Yeah, I love that question. So, I think that when I found out I was autistic, it was a good turning point for me. Honestly, I feel like people who are neurodivergent, I like to say that they're neurospicy because
Neurospicy, I love that term too.
I don't like the word divergent, because I feel like, yeah, I don't know. I feel like people who are neurospicy are, honestly just, like, gifted as fuck, right? Like, I think that there are people that just, like, go against the grain, and, like, if you can hone that, then you've got a lot of power there and a lot of leadership, right? So I think when I found out that I was autistic, that's really when I hit a turning point, both, for my personal life, but also professionally, because then it was kind of like, okay, I can't just like hustle my way into this because like that's just I can't like mentally that defeats me and then I'm down and I can't do this. I can't help anybody if I am like, in the fetal position on the floor. Like I can't do anything. Um, so yeah, I think one of the biggest things that I like to do, and it takes like 2 seconds, is just to check in with myself, be like, hey, how many spoons do I've got right now? Or like, what's my energy at right now? Um, and just kind of checking in and just starting to identify like, okay, something like washing the dishes takes literally all of my spoons. So if I've got none to start with, am I going to wash those dishes? No, I'm not going to do that. Right? Like, cuz I don't need to. Um or just, same thing with my business. If there were things that took so much of my energy, I was like, "You know what? It's okay. I don't need to do that right now. I'll save it for a day when I've got the energy for it." Um, and so it just kinda helped create some boundaries with myself and the expectations I had on myself. And most of those expectations come from society and upbringing anyways, and are they for you? No, they're usually not. Um, my energy is like, I can do a little bit of work and then I need a shit ton of rest, because that's just how I am. And so I tend to, with as my ADHD brain is kind of like, okay, let's do all of these things and just burn ourselves out so we have nothing left and then you're dead for days, right? And so I know that I get that way now. I understand where that comes from. And so it's just that constant check in helps me to just be like, okay, we aren't going to fill the list of to dos. We're going to do 3 things. And then we're going to, just take the rest of the day to just do what makes us feel good, what recovers, right? And operating in that way in my personal life and in my business has really shifted things a lot for me, just energetically. It's just much more enjoyable. I feel much more myself. And that's not to say that I don't have days where I, really struggle, or especially if routine changes, that's a big struggle for me. But then I know, okay, we've got company coming on this day. So here's the boundaries I'm going to set for that. And then I'm going to recover after that. I'm going to do literally nothing for the couple days after that, right? So I think it's just knowing how you operate, setting up those intentions or those boundaries, and checking in has been huge. And I think that that's something so simple and so minute. People tend to be like, oh, that's give me like a better a better example. And it's like, no, if you just check in with yourself, you'd be surprised at how you're hustling on something and you feel fucking drained, and you're trying to give something 100% and you've got nothing left in your tank. That doesn't work. So I think that those check-ins have been huge.
Yeah, and it's surprising how much we actually don't check in with ourselves, like at
No.
all, ever.
Mm-mm.
Um, being, a therapist and a coach, like I open most of my sessions with really like, hey, like how you doing? And it seems like such a, bland question, but most of the time when somebody says like, how are you? We're like, good, fine. Like we don't actually take the time to truly answer it. But when like a coach or a therapist who you're paying to like actually listen to your true answer asks you that question and
Yeah.
you take a pause and you're like, oh my gosh, like I'm actually like not okay. Whoa,
Yeah.
I didn't even realize like how not okay I am. Oh my gosh, right? Because we're just basically taught to numb, to not feel, to go through
Yeah.
this whole life
Right.
on autopilot and to just go through the motions and just do all the things and keep it external, 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 look outward, look outward, look outward. We're really not taking that time to look inward and to even have the ability to have the awareness to then self-regulate, right? Because self-regulation is like, that's a whole other conversation that we could have, but you need to know how you're doing. Like that's like step
Yeah.
one is
Right.
where are you at? Um, and I think that it's so interesting. The other point that you touched on that I think is really important to reiterate. I remember way back when I was a baby therapist and I was working in children's outpatient for a nonprofit that shall remain nameless. And I would see all of these kids, mostly young males, whose parents were dragging them in, and they're like, little Johnny here has got ADHD. I put him on the medication. Like now we're in therapy, and like we need to like get him to just sit still and pay attention and do what all the other kids are doing. And it never sat well with me. It never ever sat
Mm-mm.
well with me. And
Mm-mm.
more of my therapy would actually be educating the parents about the fact that their child's brain just works differently and how amazing that is and what a beautiful gift that is and how much they're going to be able to do something different with their life
Yep.
because their brain works in this way. And
Mm.
it's not something to squash or to try
Yep.
to like, get them to like fit in. It's
Right.
actually something to cultivate and to nurture
Mm-hmm.
because they now have this innate ability to do it different. And that is so necessary, especially looking at the way that the world functions now, right? It's so many people are breaking out of the status quo, and the people who
Yeah.
are actually like secret, millionaires overnight or whatever are all those kids that they were putting on
Yeah.
the ADHD
Yeah.
meds back in the day and telling them to like sit down and be quiet. And what are they
Right.
doing? They're sitting there daydreaming of all the different things that they'd rather be doing with their lives than sitting in math class learning something that they're never going to use.
Right.
So I
Right.
love that you brought that up because
Yeah.
I am 100% with you there.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, the shadow work, especially, and also just finding out about my autism and ADHD and how to manage that has made me a much better mother.
Mm.
My children are neurospicy too, obviously, because I am, and um, they they're gonna freaking change this world. I already know it because they're going to have tools that I never had because I'm going to provide that for them and I'm going to make sure that they get that. So instead of being like, oh, like at school, you need to sit and be quiet, I'm going to advocate and be like, hey, I understand that, this has been a struggle. What can we do to assist him in learning? Can we, um, maybe have him sit on the floor cross-legged instead of his seat? Is he able to just kind of stand in the back of the room or whatever, right? Like I'm able to advocate now,
Hmm.
instead of just being like slap on the wrist, like, no, do as you're told. Yeah, it's definitely made me a better mother. And you're
Hmm.
right. You're right. Absolutely. All of these kids are going to change this world. And we already are seeing that. There's tons of people when COVID happened, tons of people left their jobs and started doing the things that they're passionate about. And we're seeing all of that success.
Hmm. Yeah. Speaking of advocating, if you could share any advice with someone who, whether they have a label or a diagnosis or not, feels like they need things that they're not allowed to need, right? So maybe they have family visiting and they need breaks and they feel bad, or their family's going to be like, what's wrong that you're like taking time away from us? Do you not like us? How would you kind of encourage somebody to be able to advocate for themselves in those types of situations?
Yeah. So I laugh because it's literally just happened for me, over the holidays. So, it's just funny. It's Christmas and my entire we now live in Nashville, and my entire family came down from Wisconsin to Nashville, and it was very overwhelming. And I love my family despite our differences. I love them very much, and seeing them all in one room was amazing, but overwhelming because it was loud and there was lots of people and it was different. And so at one point, I kind of went into one of the quieter areas of our home, where my mom was, and she had a headache. So she was kind of just laying down. And I sat down and she was like, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Oh," normally I would have been like, "Oh, nothing, I'm fine." But I was just like, "No, I'm overwhelmed." And she immediately took that personally and was like, "Well, why? Is it us?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, but not in like a bad way. Like it's just overwhelming. It's loud. There's a lot of things going on. I'm just overwhelmed." Um there's nothing bad about it. And she just kinda was like, "Oh, okay." And she kinda grabbed my hand, and it was a nice moment that we had. And I realized in that moment, like, man, if I could just tell it like it is, that everything would be so much easier. I think we just go straight to the assumption that people are gonna handle things poorly when we, you know, lay down a boundary or something like that, but you can lay it down with love, you know? Like, yeah, you guys are the problem, but it's not a bad thing. Like, I love you and I'm so happy you're here. It's just different and it's just a little noisy and I'm just taking a breather, Like I, I think that I think a lot of times people get scared of boundaries and things like that because they think like, oh, I have to be super firm and like regimented and just harsh, and that's not the case. You can lay it down with love, and And if they take it poorly, that's more of a reflection on them. That's their shadow. They're getting upset because maybe they feel unworthy or they feel something, and that's not your responsibility to coddle. It really isn't. So your responsibility in every given moment is to handle your shit. Um, so if you're feeling like overwhelmed and you're feeling just out of body and just not good, like you have every right to just go and do whatever you need to do to get yourself good. Because if you do that, you're going to have a much better experience with the people around you and much more efficiently and quickly too if you just try to force it. It's like I said before, when you're trying to give something 100% and you've got maybe 5% left in the tank, like it doesn't fucking work. It's the same thing. It doesn't work. So don't even try to, you know, hustle through it. Just state it. I'm feeling this, and it's just a feeling. You don't have to take it personal. It's just a feeling. Um, and I think the other thing too is there's so many times that I recognize that, ah, shit, I masked and I didn't even realize it. And I get a little like, ah, man, why didn't I just say I was feeling overwhelmed or do this or do that? Just give yourself some love and grace that you're not perfect and you're learning about yourself every single day. And it's not always going to be this, I'm so proud of myself. I set this boundary and it went really well. And, sometimes you don't and you forget. And it's after that you're like, I should have said that. And that's okay because you take that for next time. Everything that we ever experience is something to learn, and we grow by taking action from the things that we've learned in the past. And, so just take that and roll with it. So
That was a kick-ass response. I love that. I love that. That was great. No, that was literally like if anybody was looking for like a little therapy, you just kind of like listen to that last like 10 minutes. That'll solve a lot of your problems, I promise you. So speaking of taking responsibility, we've kind of like touched a little bit on shadow work and how that's kind of helped you in your journey to get to know yourself, to self-regulate, to, essentially be able to come to terms with who you are, how you want to serve in the world. And your unique specialty is womb shadow work. So if you could share a little bit about what it is, who it's for, who it might help, who can help, own their shit through some womb shadow work, I would love to hear all about it.
yeah, well, there's so much to share. I'll try to try to sum it all up, I guess.
We can have Nikki back for a part 2.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So womb shadow work is the process of diving into our unconscious mind. So all of the things that we repress, all of the things that we are completely unaware of, at the same time that we're diving into our physical, like womb space or our sacral chakra. And so what that means is I specialize in helping people that have repressed sensual, sexual, creative type trauma. Um, and uh, typically we'll see a lot of things within the womb space that have to do with just like our personal power and passion, anything that gives us some sort of passion in life. So soul purpose type stuff. We see a lot of inner child stuff in there too. We also see a lot of balance between masculine and feminine. So it's a great place to connect to if you're trying to balance those energies out. The womb really is all about balance, and me being a Libra, it's absolutely perfect. Because it's the balance of our masculine or divine masculine, it's our balance of divine feminine, and it's the balance of our darkness and also our lightness. And we all have a unique energy, like code, I guess. Some of us are more masculine, some of us are more feminine, some of us are more dark, some of us are more light. And that's not to say that gender has anything to do with it. It's just the energy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, me, I am a woman, I identify as a woman, but I'm kind of more of a masculine woman. I've always been a tomboy. I'm always into I played D&D and like, all of those things, right? I've always been a little bit more of a masculine woman, but that doesn't have anything to do with my gender. I've also always been a little bit darker than I've always been light. I'm into dark shit. I like spooky stuff. I've always liked spooky stuff, and there's pieces of me that, tried to deny that. But the more womb work that we do, what we're essentially doing is balancing all of those energies out. And so that's how we find ourselves. That's how we find what we're meant to do in this world. And that's how we find embodiment. Embodiment really is just that practice of balancing all of those energies, and finding those practices that work for you. And so that's really what it's all about. And as far as who can practice, literally everybody in this world should be practicing it. There's a lot of reasons why. And there's some womb workers out there that will say only women with wombs can practice womb work. And I say that that's a bunch of shit. Everybody has a sacral chakra, and you know and and it doesn't matter whether you have a physical womb or not. It's really just the space that we're talking about, right? So for some of us, we have a physical womb, but for some of us, we don't, and that's the sacral chakra. It's the same space. It's the same energy. It's the same thing. The other thing is that we're all connected to a womb in two different ways. Physically, we're born from a womb. That's how we're here. And then energetically, like in our soul is born from a womb as well, right? We call that God, creatrix, goddess, whatever you like to use. We're born from that. And so we all come from the same place. So we all have a connection to womb. And so everyone should be doing womb shadow work or womb work in some regards, because it really is just the balance of those energies. That is what womb work is all about. And everybody can benefit from that, especially men. Like there's so many men in this world that need it. But of course, because how demonized that feminine type work is, there many won't ever do it. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think really just coming back to that word of balance is
Mm-hmm.
so important. And I think that's one thing that I've learned just from consuming your content on social media is that it is a really great space to work in to get that energetic balance. Like, there's all types of subconscious work, there's all types of conscious work, there's all types of somatic work. But womb work really is about, kind of clearing things out so that you can have those balanced energies, but not necessarily balanced in terms of 50-50, balanced in terms of what is your unique energy signature and really coming back to that so that you're vibrating in alignment with like your highest self, your deepest truth.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that is such a beautiful thing. I see that a lot when I used to work primarily with couples. I would, have basically both, were embodying a ton of masculine energy and they were like
Mm-hmm.
not attracted to each other. They weren't
Yeah.
intimate with each other. They were fighting all the time because, especially in, I was working pretty much in like, the, suburbs of Philly. So I had like the dual income, but mom was like doing everything, cooking, cleaning, running the kids
Oh,
everywhere,
yeah.
making sure everybody had their stuff and working. So like full masculine energy just to like get shit done. And then
Mm-hmm.
dad, was trying to be like, well, I'm the dad. I'm the, I'm working on the right. And so they would just be so at odds. And like there was
Yeah.
no polarity and there was no balance because both of them were just hyper existing in the masculine. And that like, and then, the mom would really feel a lot of resentment. The dad didn't feel like he was able to be in his
Mm-hmm.
role.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm speaking in very like heteronormative terms because that's mostly like who I saw at that time. But being able to exist in a balanced energy it's just so important for like regulation purposes and also to
Right.
have healthy polarity in our relationships as well.
Right. I mean, absolutely. And yeah, you're speaking in kind of like heteronormative experience, but that how many of us have experienced that? It's most married couples go through that, and we wonder why they're not happy, or why they don't have a sex life, or why their sex life is shit, right? Like, there's a reason, because he is not owning his masculine energy, and she is not owning her feminine. Um, and honestly, like, it sounds, well, it doesn't even sound silly. It sounds like, yeah, that makes sense. Um, but my sex life got so much better the more womb work I did, because I started to realize what sex really was. Um, and it's really just about owning your own authentic energetic balance, right? So I am in a heteronormative relationship, where I am more feminine than my husband, who's more masculine. And so when we're intimate, that is the energy exchange that we have. And what that should really be is that masculine energy of safety and protection and helping, and really just that type of energy. And then the feminine is all about nurturing and nourishing, and that flow, right? And
Mm-hmm.
those two energies work so beautifully together. When you have those come together in those really pure forms and you are intimate, I mean, that's essentially what sex magic is all about. That is a beautiful relationship. And then you start to see that relationship grow, like, outside of the bedroom. Um, and that's essentially what makes that relationship better. Now, you can apply the same thing if you have same-sex couples, right? There's always going to be someone that has a little bit more masculine or a little bit more feminine. It doesn't really matter. It's just about owning your own unique energy, balancing that out, coming together, and having this reciprocal, like, energetic exchange, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what sex should be all about, and that intimate relationship should be all about, is that reciprocation of, like, I am giving and receiving the same amount. And that is what so many couples, regardless of gender, are missing, because the world we live in is so masculine, and
Mm-hmm.
everything is masculine. The women are masculine, everybody, right? And so that balance, you're not seeing it, and so you know everything kind of falls.
Yeah. And then we get out of balance and here we are trying to like raise the vibration of the collective, and we're all like over on the masculine side, and like there's no balance. And I
Right.
think that that is where the work that you do comes in. And just to kind of, give people a little bit of like a fun little tie up for us today, what would you say are, maybe just like three things that people could do to incorporate intention around nourishing their womb, their, sacral center, just kind of like bringing that into their lives, into their awareness?
So, number one, just connecting to it every day. Like, put your hand on the space and just ask it, hey, how are you doing today? Right? Like, just that. Right? It's so simple. But do we ever do it? No. It's just like that check-in we talked about earlier. It's simple, but just ask yourself, how are you doing today? Right? And then asking, what do you need today? Like, what do you need in this moment? Right? So I think that those are really, really important. The other thing I like to do is, if you're somebody that likes to journal, is to journal with your womb. You can kind of get into a meditation so you're nice and relaxed, but then just asking your womb some questions like, what do I need to create for my home life or my business or whatever, what creation is coming to mind, or what do I need to do to feel embodied every day? What's a new practice I need to start implementing? Right? Like there's so many different questions you can ask your womb, and she'll always have the answers. And then, I think diving into that shadow of your womb is so vitally important. As um, there's so much that we house in there that we need to get rid of. If all of our chakras are like, closets, and our body is our house, the womb is the largest closet that we have. It's packed full to the brim with stuff. Um, and there's so much that we house there that is not serving us. People pleasing, over giving, not really understanding yourself, not understanding what you're here to do, and doing something that is soul crushing. Um, you know, Religious trauma, like all of this stuff is just small examples. So removing those things is going to be the most efficient way at really finding yourself. And so that is really, really important. And actually, one of a great way that you can do to start a shadow work, or especially a womb shadow work specifically, is I have a womb shadow work journal. Uh, so that's something that someone could start off with, just to kind of tap into some of the dark side of their womb a little bit. That might help.
Mm, I love that. And so, speaking of the journal, we have your very first, book that we've talked about. We have the journal. Where else can people find you, and what other things are you, breathing life into right now?
So you can find me on Instagram and TikTok. It's just at the underscore womb witch. And then I have a podcast as well, which is called Witchcraft and Wellness. So that's a place you can listen to me about, all things health and wellness, especially shadow work. And right now I'm really excited. I've created something new, that I'm calling Dark Goddess Flows, which is kind of I created because I loved the concept of Kundalini, but I hated Kundalini. um, just didn't vibe with me as much as I wanted it to. So I created something myself. Um, and so that's something that I have a challenge coming up right now, but by the time this airs, I'll actually have some bundles that people can purchase. So there'll be packs of flows, is what they're called, which is kind of like your kriyas essentially. So those are I have like a dark goddess school on my website, so you can purchase meditations and past workshops, and you'll also be able to purchase these flows in bundles as well. So that's what I'm really excited about now, because that's kind of like that's new and different. So, but
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that one of the things I really appreciate about your work is that you have done a lot to make this very accessible for
Yeah,
people.
yeah, yeah.
You do a lot in terms of just getting on, your social media and just talking
Yeah.
about yourself, your journey, how you've incorporated this, what this is. Because again, I feel like a lot of times, like there's a lot of shroud and mystery and ambiguity like around these things, and it's not even necessarily like gatekeeping. It's just that people are like,
Mhm,
I
mhm,
really don't understand what the hell that is and how it relates to
mhm,
me and how it could help me. So I see you sharing a lot and really like breaking that down into very like bite size
mhm.
informative moments for people, in
Right.
addition to making a lot of different ways where either people can work with you, they can work with you individually in a group, they can
Yeah,
purchase things
right.
to do on their own, whether it's a journal or a meditation or watching a past workshop. To me, like being a leader is the fact that you're showing up to serve, right? Like you're showing up because this is your calling and it's your purpose and you're here to help heal. Not because you're, trying to like scale to 7 figures and blah, blah, blah. And like, yeah, cool. Like it's great, like energetic exchange is important and all of those things. But again, when I see people who truly have like a lot of tiered offerings where there's a lot of value for very accessible prices, that's something I always like to highlight, to just kind of be like, hey, like these people are the real deal. Like they really are doing this because they care about what they're doing. They also need to like house themselves and feed their families.
Right. Yeah.
But it's not this like, unless you pay like 3 payments of $3,333, like
I hate that.
You can't talk to me.
No, I do try to be very accessible because that is really important to me. I think it's important to make money. I don't think that there should be any reason we should fear money. But at the same time, there are people out there that just like can't do that right now. What, they don't get the healing because of whatever? Like, no. So that is something that I'm very passionate about. So I do have, meditations and things that people can purchase really, really low end. My group program, Womb Alchemy, which is my group womb shadow work program, that actually I do a scholarship every round. There's a scholarship for people in need that need that. And so that's something that, that scholarship is one of my favorite things because the magic it has brought to some people that really needed it is amazing. So I always that piece is just so important, I think, for people, and also because like I hear on a daily basis people saying to me, ooh, I don't want to go into my womb. Like, I don't want to see what's there. If I were to just be like, yeah, this is the only way you work for me, thousands of dollars, people would be like, yeah, no.
So like, I already have my own blocks and then you're going to create even more blocks. Like, exactly. No, I'll just never do it.
Yeah. Sometimes it's helpful to take those bite-sized pieces or like, just those little stepping stones. And that's what I did with shadow work. I started with individual sessions and then I did a group thing and it kind of led to there. So, sometimes that is an important way to start because you got to get your feet wet before you just dive in sometimes. Unless you're a person that just likes to dive in, which I've had those people and I love them. They've paid my bills, but essentially not everybody's like that. And you got to meet people where they're at. So.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, Nikki, thank you so much for your time, for your energy, for your effort, for your service, for all the amazing things that you are putting out into the world. And I am just so honored that you took the time to have a conversation about some really like, fun and juicy things. I mean, we got some sex talk in there.
Oh, yeah.
Like we really did all the things. And I am all about that. And we will make sure to link everything that Nikki mentioned in the show notes, as well as Nikki's Instagram and TikTok handles, so that you can follow along because, like I said, I really enjoy following you and learning a little bit, here and there every day. And I am looking forward to whatever it is that you're going to be putting out next, as well as the things that you already have. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I'm sure that we'll be having you back for a part 2 because I feel like there was like 20,000 subtopics that we could have totally
definitely
got into. So I appreciate that.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This was awesome.
There you have it. Another episode of the Sacred Leadership Podcast on the books. I hope your time spent here served you and nourished you. Join us every Tuesday for more honest conversations and powerful insights. Remember, exceptional leaders share the wealth. Send this episode to someone who would benefit, leave a review to let others know about the show, and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Talk to you soon.